Okay. Um, the genesis of this particular episode or little series was I mentioned to Rabbi Marsha that I had done something on Shir Hashirim in the Haggadah and in the Agadah. And what we kind of focused on last week was the connection with the Haggadah Shel Pesach, the custom, the Sephardic custom and Mizrahi custom of saying it at the end of the Seder, towards the end of the Seder night. That very flimsy connection with Pharaoh's horse that Rabbi David Abu Darham brings up, and then to take a look at that particular verse in chapter 1, verse 9, and see how it plays out, not only how it was used in halacha in the Middle Ages, but how it played out in different forms of agada, of legendary material, one being their Aramaic Targum, another one being another two from various places. Today we'll see an example of the Midrash, which is more of a collection, which is Midrash Shir HaShirim. But in the meantime, we took a break to look at that idea with the help of Rashi between how do we as readers look at this book as both pshat, a simple meaning, the contextual meaning of how this book was meant, how these texts were meant, or what was intended when they were originally written as love poetry between a man and a woman and a man. We talked a lot about that because that's the nature of this group, to deal with gender issues as well. And one of the things, or possibly Rashi's main point in his introduction to his commentary, which Professor Sarah Kamin of blessed memory posited his whole commentary to Song of Songs was a polemic, an answer to what was found in church literature at the time, starting with the church fathers early in the first millennium, but then going on through Middle Ages as well. And his point was that on one hand, you can't take the context out of you can't take a text entirely out of its context. You still have to, it has to make sense in the way it was written. And that's his way of saying, yes, this is love poetry. But on the other hand, what's really important for me, he says, and for readers and his students, was to understand this as the ongoing an allegory for the ongoing saga of love relationship between God and the people of Israel. Most people have heard that already before we studied together, I would imagine, even if you haven't studied Shir HaShirim per se. So we're going to start today with number 9. It was Sylvia who brought up the issue of a debate over this book. And I will start with what many of us learned when we were younger, which was on the knees or the shoulders, or somehow related to the 19th century Jewish historians like Gretz and a few others. It turned out, at least by the 1980s, nobody was accepting it, not at Hebrew University. It wasn't that there was no canonization process the way that those Jewish historians of the 19th century assumed there was. They assumed or presumed that there was a process like there was in the church, where a bunch of sages got together. What you hear about, what you read about in history books and Jewish history books is this kind of convention, this synod of rabbis in Jamnia, which we call Yavne, in which they decided which books would be in the canon, which would be out. We have no basis for that other than conjecture. The basis for a debate over 2 books is what we have in this Mishnah here, and it's complicated. It's complicated because the words mean something. We understand from the context what the words mean, but a lot of scholars have had a hard time over the centuries figuring out how did the words come to mean what they mean. And what I'll say now is that when something transfers impurity, mitameh, transfers impurity, that is considered, when this is written, not only to deal with impurity, but when things transfer some sort of energy or power or status, one thing to another. I hope it'll come clear that's what it means. It means that if something is important, it can transfer its status. It's contagious. It's contagious, but not in a negative term, as we'll see. Now, actually, as we won't see, that's in the background. It's really the only way to understand this. Believe me, I even now, I'm not sure I entirely understand this. Over the years, when I saw this, when I first saw this sugya, I don't remember seeing this in yeshiva, in my yeshiva studies, because it's in Yadayim. Yadayim is a Mishnah in the part of the Mishnah of the six orders of the Mishnah, which most people don't go to. It's in Taharot, and those two last sections, Taharot, purity, and Kodshim, holiness things, sacred objects, sacred sacrifices, is it's a full 30% of the Mishnah, but it's not a lot of Mishnahs that people go to. There's not a lot of Talmud on it. In fact, I think the only I didn't check. Well, it doesn't matter. There's not a lot of Talmud, Babylonian Talmud on it, and it doesn't apply because it didn't apply by the time the temple's destroyed. It doesn't apply, so nobody was really studying it. When people did study it, was if you know that custom of saying of a community saying all the Mishnah in memory of somebody. I don't know if you've ever seen that before. That's very, very prevalent in the Orthodox world. Someone dies, and li'ilui zichro, to raise their memory, just like Kaddish raises the memory, kind of brings the memory of that person. That person helps that soul go up. Li'ilui nishama, when we light a candle, li'ilui nishama, for raising the elevation of the soul. There's this custom in the first 30 days to study all of the Mishnah, the entire Mishnah, which is far simpler than the entire Talmud, right? And all the Mishnah. And so what happens is that when somebody dies, somebody sets it up, they've set up a calendar with all these little boxes, and you sign up which ones you're going to learn. It's an honor system, right? You learn them in memory every day in that 30 days. When I was in yeshiva, when I discovered this kind of custom in Kerem B'Yavne, I remember distinctly that by the time I got to the list, the things that were left were Kodshim and Tarot, right? The ones that are hardest to understand and the least application from a halachic point of view. Sasha and I did this a few years ago when her uncle died, Orthodox family in Israel, and the family set it up. And the two of us, we studied Masechet Avodah Zarah, the tractate on idolatry. And while I had studied that because we'd studied the Talmud of Avodah Zarah and for various reasons in Maimonides, I'd studied the laws. It was Sasha's first exposure to that kind of stuff. So for those that know, Sasha's my wife. She's not here today, otherwise often she participates with us. And she just is really, she couldn't believe all this was in the Mishnah, because we're used to, in regular, when you learn from a sermon, when you learn at a class in a synagogue, when you go to a school, a Jewish day school, usually what you get there's this classic body of Mishnayot that you'll get from Brachot, the laws of prayer and blessings, from Shabbat, all laws of Shabbat, maybe the different Tzachim, Sukkah, sometimes Sanhedrin, if it has to do with political things and legal things. If you went to an Orthodox yeshiva, you got a lot of Baba Kama, Baba Metzia, and Baba Batra, which are the three Babas. They were originally one tractate that have to do with torts, all sorts of civil law. But you don't get to the last one. Why am I saying all this? Because here I am at Hebrew University, and I think it was in my first year. It was probably the part of the Professor Emmanuel Tov's Introduction to Bible course. And he starts to do this, and here I'm a graduate of a prestigious yeshiva, and I look at this. I said, I've never seen this stuff before. And I went to the source. I just couldn't figure it out. And it turns out most people couldn't figure it out, and they came up with a really I don't know how to do this, but you can see what I'm doing here with scratching my ear. This kind of a roundabout explanation for it, which I'll share with you in just a moment. But let's read the Mishnah and understand that whatever the etymology of the terms that are used are, what they mean in this context is they're important. Something is noteworthy, it's important if it can transfer impurity. But let's go ahead and read it, and then we'll go back to the explanation. Okay, Dan, you want to give this a try? Mishnah Yadayim. Yadayim means hands. And we'll see an example. Well, this whole third chapter talks about how does a hand become impure? If the whole body is struck with tzaraat, scaly skin disease, then the whole body becomes impure. If you touch something, then only your hand becomes, it depends what degree of impurity the thing was. That's the context in which this section comes, right? So go ahead, Dan.
All the holy scriptures defile the hands. The Song of Songs and Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, defile the hands. Rabbi Judah says, the Song of Songs defile the hands, but there is a dispute about Kohelet. Rabbi Yosef says, Kohelet does not defile the hands, but there's a dispute about the Song of Songs. Rabbi Shimon says, the ruling about Kohelet is one of the leniencies of Beit Shammai and one of the stringencies of Beit Hillel.
Okay, and we're already lost, right? We're already, what can be understood from this more than anything else? Anybody?
A lack of consensus.
Okay, so what's new? What's new in the Mishnah, right? Okay, that's good. But a lack of consensus about
The status of these two books with respect to defilement of the hands.
or these two books. So let's leave it right now. These two books, the status of these two books. Yes, it ostensibly says defiling the hands, but obviously we're studying Song of Songs. What is particular about these two books? There are 24 books of the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh. That includes the 12 minor prophets as one book, and that is Kings as one book, and Samuel as one book, and Chronicles as one book. Why these two?
Well, neither of them have much to say about God. Neither of them are narratives. Both of them are ascribed to Solomon. And they're very, on the face of it, very secular in content.
Or questionable, maybe. Yeah. So secular, they don't have God. That is true. There's a little bit of God in Kohelet. You do in Ecclesiastes there is some God, but in Song of Songs there's no God. Secular is one thing, but they both of them seem to be influenced by outside culture. If we took all of we know about the rest of the Hebrew Bible and you say this seems to be different, when Ecclesiastes says everything is vapor, it's all vapor, nothing matters, there's nothing new under the sun, it sounds very Hellenistic, and it is influenced by Hellenistic thought. It's a late book, and that's when, if we ever study Kohelet, which probably won't be with me, I'm having my hands full with Proverbs when it comes to wisdom literature, but perhaps you've done it already with somebody else, then you can deal with that influence. There's a really important commentary by Robert Gordis of blessed memory, who taught at the seminary, one of the conservative movement great scholars of the 20th century. But from Song of Songs point of view, it's what we brought up a little bit last week, and what we'll see a little bit here. But I didn't bring, what we'll do next time is maybe some of the raunchiest sections. The sections like people look at this as, really? This is in Holy Scripture? Right? What is this doing here? And I think that's kind of in the background of this debate. So it's not as if there was a vote. Getting back to Gretz and other 19th century Jewish historians who projected what they saw in church history on rabbinic history. There's no vote, there's no agenda. We will decide today which are the holy. There was in the church world, right? There were synods that talked about what books were in, what books were out of the Christian canon, and that there was no. And to this very day, that's not decided for all Christians. You probably know that a Roman Catholic Bible is not the same as a Lutheran influenced Bible, a mainline Protestant Bible. There's no, the apocryphal books are not in there. You may also know that even from a Jewish point of view, the Septuagint, which was a Jewish Greek translation of the Jews of Alexandria who spoke Greek and not Hebrew, just like the land of Israel. As I mentioned last week, the Jews in the land of Israel in the first millennium did not speak Hebrew, but they did speak Aramaic, hence the translation of scripture into Aramaic. The Septuagint translation from the 2nd century BCE is a Jewish translation, And in that translation, there are more books than we have in ours. The book of Judith, books of Maccabees 1 and Maccabees 2, Wisdom of Solomon, Tovia, and there's a few others, okay? Now, so this is not a convention, this is not a synod, this is a conversation between second century rabbis, important rabbis, over first, second century rabbis, over what status do these books have? And this is how there's a debate, and there's a debate over what there was a debate about. It's a debate on a debate. Okay, let's go on to the second.
Rabbi Shimon ben Azai said, I have received a tradition from the 72 elders on the day when they appointed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, head of the academy, that the Song of Songs and Kohelet defile the hands.
Which means, in the context, that that's a good thing. I know it feels like that's a bad thing. In other words, this is why I almost wasn't going to do this, but Sylvia brought it up last week, right? It's if you say something defiles the hands, like when we were kids, what defiled the hands? A Playboy, right? Or some worse kind of, more extreme kind of pornography, some sort of violent book, a violent movie, something that had an X rating or an R rating, depending what it is. That I would say, to my mind, that would defile the hands, right? It's exactly the opposite here. Defiling the hands is a good thing. It means it's important. Go ahead. Save the comments. We'll do comments when we finish this.
Rabbi Akiva said, far be it. No man in Israel disputed that the Song of Songs, saying that it does not defile the hands. For the whole world is not as worthy as the day on which the Song of Songs was given to Israel. For all the writings are holy, but the Song of Songs is the holy of holies. If they had a dispute, they had a dispute only about Kohelet. So
again, it's the debate on the debate, about the debate. And what Rabbi Akiva says, it was never under question. Never, ever did anybody ever say there was a problem, that is, that it wasn't holy. Not only that, it's the Holy of Holies. This reminds us, of course, of when certain politicians or teachers or rabbis, when they start to raise their voice, sometimes you're a little bit suspect, why are they being so passionate about that particular comment? As one of the kibbutz from my friend and teacher Yair Zakovich would always quoted this book called Yalkut HaKsavim, which is a kind of a humorous satire of the generation of the socialist ideologues of the kibbutz movement of the 1950s. And they said when so and so left after giving a passionate lecture about ideology, kibbutz ideology, they found his notes. And in looking over the notes, they found written on the side, claim is weak. My point is weak. Raise the voice. So this is Rabbi Akiva raising his voice. Point is weak. Ria, you must have something to say about this.
Reminds me of the saying, a lot of noise on the staircase, nobody coming down.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And this is what people remember. Sylvia, I'm guessing this is what you were remembering about when you mentioned this last week, about this debate about Song of Songs.
Yes, and thank you for sending that part of it, because it was Rabbi Akiva's comments that I was remembering.
Right. And so what throws us off is this impurity of the hands thing. I'm going to relate to you just something, just to finish it up. What I tried to say was, no, we know what it means. How did the language get there? And there may be more up-to-date studies, but what I remember of this from my studies is that in medieval commentaries, and maybe it's already somewhere in Talmud, I don't know, but pre-modern commentaries, they came up with this theory that the truma, that is the food that was set aside for the Kohanim, for the priest to eat, and the priests have to eat it when they're holy. It can't become, when they're pure, when they're pure. It can't become impure. If it doesn't, it's no longer, you can eat impure food. But impure doesn't mean dirty, right? It's spiritually, it's ritually impure. That's a whole different story. But anyway, the gifts that you give, the 1% that you give to the priests, and you put it aside, that becomes holy, and you can't eat it. But a Kohen who's pure and his family, they can eat it. And what happened is they would store the truma next to their holy scriptures, their megillot, their scrolls of Kitvei Kodesh, of the Bible, of Tanakh, whatever they had. And then mice would come and they would eat the truma and they would render it impure. And that in turn, and then they would eat, the mice would come to there because they're attracted to food, and then they would eat nibble at the sides of the scrolls as well. And that would render them theoretically impure because the mice are impure animals. It's kind of convoluted, but that's what I remember of how it got there. There's a modern scholar in Jerusalem who came up with a much simpler idea, I think, and it is that now I'm blanking. Give me a second. Now suddenly I blanked it. I made a note. You know what? I'm sorry. I'm blanking on it now. I can't remember what he said. But basically, the bottom line is that if it just means it's I know what he says. He says things that were holy were believed to be able to influence whatever they taught. They were contagious. Their holiness was contagious. And since the rabbis didn't have another word for transference of that kind of energy or power or status, they used the word that they had in their vocabulary, which was mitameh, which is to become impure, because impurity is contagious. Purity is not contagious usually. There's no word that, mitaher is something you do to something to make it pure. This cup has to be, you've got to immerse it in water or whatever needs to be done. So the verb for transference of power, of character, of energy, of holiness in this case, of sacredness, became that verb. That's I don't know if he's the only one, but I saw that's Joshua Kolb, who's at I think he's still at the conservative yeshiva in Jerusalem. That's what he says. In any case, what it means is it's important. Yes, Ria.
Anyway, okay, I wanted to ask you, because kadosh, the other meaning is separate. So does it have that the holy? I'm just imagining the truma and the priests are going to eat this stuff, and the mice have gotten in it, and so does it transfer to the mice that they become holy? Is there any discussion about that?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. It only goes one way. When there's something negative, that's my point. Purity doesn't transfer to something else.
So what is this? How does it exist? The holiness that we're thinking of as the underlying meaning of being separate. Does it have any meaning in that?
Yes, but it needs to be so. Words are tricky things. Etymologies are tricky things because they happen over. Semantic development happens over centuries, right? Certainly over years, but sometimes. So, if lekadesh something was to set something aside, I take this cup, ani mekadesh etze, I am sanctifying it for the temple. It belongs now to the temple. I can no longer use it. Now, because I set it aside, lekadesh is in most cases, not all, but in most cases, no, I think in all cases, means it's set aside for the holy, for God, for the temple. So do you remember it was Bekrovaya Kadesh? That's in Shmini, right? We just did Parshat Shmini, where Nadav and Avihu, Aaron's sons, die, and then Moses says to him, or God says to him, this is what I meant when I said Bekrovaya Kadesh. Amongst those closest to me, I will be holy. In other words, they were sanctified / sacrificed. something. So that's a negative meaning there, perhaps. But everything else. So then you get to how else is kuf daled shin used? I hope we're not getting too much off track, but this is all kind of what we use kadosh kadosh kadosh. We know that from the prayer, right? Even if you didn't grow up in Jewish, you know it from a mass as well. Holy, holy, holy. So that's an echo of the heavenly entourage singing to God, holy, holy, holy. God says to Moses in the middle of this book, Leviticus, Kedoshim to you shall be holy. Rashi says there in that case, he echoes the rabbinic midrash. It says, you shall be prushim. Prushim to you should be set aside, set yourself aside, meaning don't marry the other people. You stay amongst yourselves, amongst the Israelite people. What else? We have going into rabbinic literature. We have kiddush. What is kiddush? It's sanctification of the day, but essentially means setting this day aside. Shabbat Kodesh, right? When I say kiddush, I'm setting the day aside, building that palace in time, as Heschel said. So setting it aside for God, essentially. When we say Beit HaMikdash, the temple, the place that's been set aside. When we say Kaddish, we're asking God to add some kedusha into this world, right? Kaddish, not just for Yortzeit, for death, of course, the whole prayer of Kaddish, asking God, help us out, bring us a little more kedusha into this world, right? That's God helping us become more godly. But where else do we have that term, kiddush, kiddushin, chuppah v'kiddushin? Thanks. Chuppah v'kiddushin, the chuppah and kiddushin.
Yeah, the marriage. Yeah.
Kiddushin. Why is kiddushin called marriage? Why is marriage called kiddushin? Anybody?
Well, they're separated out from their single life. They now have entered into another place.
Well, so that's a lovely feminist understanding. But Cantor, maybe you'll enlighten us.
Because they are set aside only for each other, and they have no business making eyes at anybody else of the opposite gender.
Still in the liberal world here, but where does it come from? The Chatan says to the Kala, Hare at mikudeshet li b'tabat zo. The Mishnah in Kiddushin, which is one of the Mishnayot, says Haisha niknet b'shalosh drachim. A woman is purchased in three ways. The word purchase there is parallel to lekadesh. Lekadesh means to set aside, but it's only traditionally, it's only the man setting aside the woman, because that woman can only be with one man. She, on the other hand, historically, strictly speaking, she doesn't mikadeshet him. She doesn't sanctify him because he can be with another woman. He can have more than one wife. Yes, I know it's unfair. I know we don't like it, but that's the way it started. With time, but not until the last half of the last part of the 20th century, and even now, not amongst all of my colleagues in the conservative movement, for instance, we see this kiddushin as hadadi, as reciprocal, true reciprocity. But I have colleagues in the conservative movement who still prefer or insist that only the Chatan will say, at mikudeshet li betabatzo, you're hereby sanctified to me with this ring. And then the Kala will say something like, ani ledodi v'dodi li, alternate text, which I did also in the first years. Being halachically oriented, but wanting to be egalitarian, for me it was important in the early 90s when I was ordained, that the woman say something. First of all, there'd be a ring under the chuppah, because in Orthodox ceremonies in Israel, by and large, there's no chuppah, there's no ring there's no woman giving the man a ring under the chuppah. Sometimes it's postponed to the very end. But it was important for us to do it at the same time, yet to still stick with this idea that traditionally there is no kiddushin, and I still have colleagues that talk that way. I'm guessing I think I was ordained in 93, probably by 98 or so, or maybe 97, I remember one of the women just said to me, I don't understand that. That doesn't make sense. If he says that to me, why can't I say that to her? I said, you know what, you should say it. And then I realized, of course you should say it. That for me, again, my own world of halakha. And then when I started to do same-sex weddings in 2000, then of course it had to be, you know, it was Muvan Me'elav. It was understood that it had to be in a truly reciprocal way. Then people said, then why are you calling it kiddushin? Because kiddushin traditionally means something very sexist. The man sets aside the woman. And my answer to that is my answer with lots of things. That we all religions, all cultures are made up of symbols. Some symbols can be refilled with new meaning. Some symbols can't be. A ketubah can be refilled with new meaning if you change the words. If you use the same words of a traditional ketubah, which is a insurance policy for the woman that she gets what she needs, but has all the power in the hands of the man, basically, other than when he divorces her and she has that get, and she has the ketubah that she can bring to the Beit Din. This is what I need to get. That's still an imbalanced kind of relationship. Then the words need to be changed. So from the beginning of doing weddings in 93, and many of us, most of us in Israel, I think, were using Hebrew ketubot that were egalitarian worded. Now, yeah, I think most of us. Far more than in the United States, that's for sure, because we understood the Hebrew, as opposed to the Aramaic here, where most people don't understand. Even today, in the rabbinical assembly instructions, perhaps in the Cantor assembly as well, there's all sorts of examples of ketubot which are egalitarian, but they're still in Aramaic and they still use a lot of the same language, which is highly problematic. What I'm saying is that lots of symbols can be transferred and given new meaning, still connected, like a ketubah, like the rings, if they go on both fingers, and some things need to be left aside. Okay, now back to our topic. I know this didn't make it that clear as to why the context is transference of tumah, of impurity to hands, and it's really fascinating why what we think is an important debate. It's fascinating for us as modern Jews, contemporary Jews, that this got stashed away. Is tucked in this cabinet here, you know, in this is, you know, far away in the land of purity and impurity, where people don't know. But what can we do? This is where it is, and what it means. The bottom line of what it means is that if you are important, if you're a thing that's important, you have the power to transfer that importance. And the last thing I want to say about this, and then I'll take any comments or questions, is that there's something very lovely about this. You know, it's like when we were younger, we thought maybe if we put the book under our pillow and went to sleep, we would, by osmosis, you know, studying for a test, we'd get it as we slept. This idea, on one hand, lots of people, I think of Mizrahi women especially, but lots of women, including Sasha, they have a book of Tehillim, Psalms, in their purse. I was in the book business in Mea Shearim for many years while I was at Hebrew University. And we sold just dozens and dozens of little Tehillim that are really too small to read, even with a magnifying glass. And also this book called Raziel HaMalach, Raziel the Angel, which is essentially a handbook to how to make amulets, which is almost never read by people, but it itself has become a talisman. It's become an amulet. And we sell dozens, a day. These little ones, they were very cheap, and people would put them in their purses or put them in cribs or in the stroller of the child to watch over them. I used to not think highly of that kind of custom superstition. But on the other hand, I like this idea that a book theoretically can be contagious in a good way. It has an influence that maybe beyond. Now, I still believe you have to read it, right? But maybe symbolically, there's something to be said for that. I don't know. Comments or questions? Yes, Ria.
We haven't gotten to why Kohelet. Were we going to discuss that?
No, because we're not doing Kohelet. Kohelet is a problematic book. There's a lot of questionable. It's not traditional biblical theology. There's some challenges to it. There's some lovely parts of it. There's some difficult parts to it, as there are in Job as well. But Ecclesiastes is, because it's a late book, which we can see because of the language. The Hebrew has been influenced by Greek, and that's why Gordis's commentary or other modern commentaries are important. But also the ideas have been, somehow there's been a cross-pollination of early Hellenistic literature. James, did you want to say something? No. Okay. All right. Should we go on? Now we're back to Song of Songs, and that's what we'll do. I can't believe we took this long. It's already, but we're gonna. I would love to get through this today if we can. Number 10, and it's a long passage to read in Hebrew, but maybe Cantor Neil, perhaps you could read the English for us. And this is one of the poems. And remember, the context of this series is Passover, is Pesach. In the Haggadah, in the Agadah, and last time we talked about this very feeble connection to Pharaoh's horse, and now we're talking about something which is ostensibly about the springtime, but for the rabbis meant much more. Go ahead.
Okay, I can not only read this, but if we have a moment, I can sing a little bit of it.
Please,
I know
then
you
I'd love-
included the
please,
music
please
of that
do.
song.
Didn't want to surprise you that way, but please do.
Yeah, no, I know that one. Anyway, here's the English read with a bit of expression. Hark, my beloved, there he comes, leaping over mountains, bounding over hills. My beloved is like a gazelle or like a young stag. There he stands behind our wall, gazing through the window, peering through the lattice. My beloved spoke thus to me. Arise, my darling, my fair one, come away, for now the winter is past, the rains are over and gone. The blossoms have appeared in the land, the time of pruning has come. The song of the turtle dove is heard in our land. The green figs form on the fig tree, the vines in blossom give off fragrance. Arise, my darling, my fair one, come away.
Okay, I thought that perhaps everybody had the text. I'm only seeing now that not everybody had. Let me put it back on screen. I apologize for that.
I just think probably they do, but we missed, or I did anyway, when you said where you were starting. So it took me a minute to catch up where you were.
All right, does everybody have the text? Okay. I just prefer this way, that way I can see faces. Okay, so perhaps Cantor maybe chant a little bit for us.
Koldodi, 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 nezeba. Koldodi, 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 nezeba. Miralegal harim, mikapets al hagavod. Miralegal harim, mikapets al hagavod. And then it goes back to koldodi, 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 nezeba.
Bringing me back to my Hebrew school days at VJCC in North Hollywood. Absolutely. I think we used to do Kol Do Di. We raised our kippot for that. For some Not really sure why. Okay, so what for back to the English? What do we get out of this?
She wants him to want her. She wants him to call her and to it's almost like in that little poem, almost like a dialogue between two lovers.
Right. Not only almost, it is actually a dialogue. Sylvia and then Ria.
Oh yeah, I don't think that you could actually get away from the fact that this is a very erotic poem. I mean, I can't see that you can get away from that.
Right.
So I wonder. I understand why Rabbi Akiva was so aggressive about bringing it back to Holy Scripture, because in fact, I could just see it. Couldn't you just see it in the 11th, 12th, 13th century? People in the pubs and the bawdy houses making a lot of good time with that.
What some of the things that stand out perhaps is peering through the lattice, this kind of go seek thing, right? So what is the
Very seductive.
Right. So Ria, go ahead.
It's beautiful. It is so lovely. It's Shakespearean, or Shakespeare got his idea, actually, a lot of his ideas from Hebrew scripture. And there's a musical quality to it. And the what the Cantor Schwartz, what you what do you call it? The music that goes with it doesn't fit with this lyrical, lovely. It's almost like Romeo Below the Balcony. And so this gazelle out there in the fields, and she sees him approaching, and it's just, I love this. And I don't, so we've switched it, or the rabbi switched it between Israel and God, but it's a really intense and beautiful scene. That's how I view it.
Okay, and what Rashi would say to you is that that's why the allegory is as powerful as it is, because it comes from reality. It comes from reality. That's how I understand that comment from Rashi.
Rabbi,
yes.
Also, this one is actually from the woman's point of view,
right?
And
the poems go back and forth in the entire book. Yeah.
And the other thing is, this is like timeless. I think any generation can relate to this poem. There's a certain amount of humanity in it that I think all of us who've ever been young can relate to it and in love.
Okay, yes, Cantor?
So let me respond to the comment about that Sephardic melody not being particularly representative as opposed to the Shir Hashirim trope, which if we have time, I'd be happy to offer also. But I believe that the reason that that melody, that I was taught to sing this particular melody with that little lilt, is the concept of the male lover bounding over the hills like a gazelle or a stag. Goldody, and it just, I picture, like an overly happy big dog jumping up and down as he's racing to greet the kid coming off the school bus and possibly bowling him over because the dog's so happy to see his young master.
Or
so
an overly excited teenage football player.
Right. In that sense, even though the Shir Hashirim trope is much more mellow and luscious, this particular Sephardi melody, or Mizrahi melody as the case may be, I think really actually does show that exuberance in a way that the trope doesn't.
So I want to pick up on the idea of the music and how it complements. That's after the fact that it's written, but our understanding of the words as they're written, what do we need to know in order to appreciate this lovely scene, which is timeless scene? Let's get behind what we need to know. When is it happening?
It's set in some sort of a Middle Eastern setting because only portions of Europe, and not necessarily the portions where Unzer Yidden actually lived, including my ancestors, many of those were not mountainous. A lot of Eastern Europe is flat as a pancake.
It reminds me of Engedi, with the gazelles that hang out at Engedi.
Mm-hmm. Or the hillsides of the Galil, or where there are fig trees, where there's right. If this would not be written by the people who lived in Saharan deserts, right, or Native Americans living in New Mexico, or indigenous people live in jungles in different places, and one of the things that we often slips through our hands, I think, is to try to understand the setting in which where this comes from. The setting in life is we kind of need to know the geography and the topography as well, and the flora and fauna. And there's an entire book. I meant to bring it down. I will try to bring it down next week. Noga Ruveni, I don't know if still alive or not, but the scholar and the naturalist who was behind Neot Ktumim. Have folks ever been to Neot Ktumim in Israel? Not far from, in between the airport and Modi'in, there's a biblical nature reserve. that has a lot of the so they publish these. One of the volumes is Nature in Shir HaShirim, because it's so essential to understand going through the entire book, which we don't necessarily do. We do some of this, like we know about figs, right? But if you lived in Joshua Tree all your life, I'm not sure you wouldn't have this. It's not, it wouldn't. So just looking away at from the time of year, from a nature point of view, when is this happening?
Right.
It's springtime.
Right? For now the winter is past, the rains are over and gone, the blossoms have appeared in the land. The time for pruning has come. Pruning because in vineyards, that's what you do after the winter. Then you start to prune away all the dead leaves or the wilted leaves and things and branches. So that's that springtime. That's another connection between Shir HaShirim and Pesach, of course. Pesach being the springtime festival, and in Israel, this is the time of year when the children, learn another song, which Cantor, I would imagine, as well, right? Nitzanim niru niru bares, eitzamir higia, eitzamir. Da-da-da, da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, dun, dun, dun. And that's a song that we sang at our Seder every year, because that's what the girls brought home from Gan, from the nursery school, and then from school. It was our way, as many Israelis, of making the Seder a little bit more connected to the land of Israel. I may have questions today about those connections with the land. I think we've spoken about those on other occasions. It's not for today. By the way, anybody that is in Southern California, and I realize most of you, if you are, you're on the coast, Or Hamidbar, together with our church allies, our church buddies, my clergy buddies here in Palm Springs, we're going to be screening No Other Land, the movie that won the Oscar for the best documentary, which is a difficult film to watch about human rights abuse in the West Bank in a particular area, and has to do with land issues. And I'll be dialoguing after the film with a Palestinian American woman, Aziza Hassan, who perhaps you've met in other contexts, about how we see this as Israeli American, Palestinian Americans, how we see this film. So the back to the poem here, this became, for instance, this particular section, but other sections of Shir HaShirim became crucial in the Zionist educational endeavor, because that's a way of inculcating the love for the land. You're in the land, right? You're not in Lithuania, where your ancestors came from, or you're not in South Africa, which has or South America has a different time clock as far as when things bloom. You're not you're not in Russia, in the northern reaches of Russia. You're in a place where the land, your life is going according to what you have in Scripture itself. There's a holiness in that, right? There's a kedusha, there's a relevance to that those of us who are Ashkenazim, our great grandparents did not feel at all when they were living when it was still frozen, when they were using potatoes for parpas, right? You probably know that, right? That many Jews from Eastern Europe used potatoes for karpas and not parsa, because there was no parsa. There was nothing green to use, so they used potatoes. Anyway, that's in the background of why the connection between Shir HaShirim and Pesach, because of the time of year. Yes, Cantor.
Can I offer to sing the exact same thing with proper Shir HaShirim trope?
Please.
I think it makes an incredible contrast. Kol dori nezeba medalleg al harim mikapez al hagevot tomedo de litzvi ol ofer ha'ayalim ineze omed achar kot lehinu mashgiach min hachalonot Meitzitz min hacharakim.
Okay, thank you.
So much more luscious.
Right, and so there's a lot of words here which are hapax logomino words, meaning that they only appear here. And that in the language of Shir Hashirim shows us it's a relatively late book. It's based on early, perhaps there's earlier parts to it, but there are words that are singular here. On the other hand, there's older usages. For instance, kol dodi, which we always thought it means the voice of my beloved. It doesn't mean here. Kol means hark, pay attention. That's like yeah, okay. A kol. All right, let's go ahead and look at this midrash and see where it takes us. Dan, I'll ask you to read again, number 11.
Blossoms have appeared in the land, the time of the nightingale has arrived, and the sound of the turtle dove is heard in our land.
Hold on just a second. So this translation reflects an older translation of the English. What we saw on the left-hand side above was the blossoms have appeared in the land, the time of pruning has come, and not the time of the nightingale. Zamir was understood by many, it doesn't appear anywhere else, but is understood in one particular document from the 11th or 12th century, was a translation from Arabic to Aramaic, strange Arabic to Hebrew. Strange story in itself that the Zamir was the nightingale from the word Zemer. But the word Zayin Mem Resh is not only music, it has to do with to prune. And that's why the later commentaries, say of the new JPS translation that we're using above, and many other commentaries today, they translate as the time of pruning, because that's and the reason that people understood Zamir as a bird was because the turtle dove is mentioned separately. They thought that maybe that's connected. Go ahead. Well, but we need to know that because of the wordplay that's happening.
Okay. The blossoms, Hanit Sanim, have appeared in the land. The administrators, Hanat Zahof, have appeared in the land. These are Moses and Aaron, as this stated. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying.
Okay, so here the word nitzanim, which means the blossom means that are open up, and and hansachot. It's not, that's a T at the end, not an F. Hansachot, the nun sadi, that wordplay, it's only wordplay. They're not connected grammatically. The wordplay is that instead of understanding, again, this is allegory, but it's woven into the midrash. It's not a targum. It's not the translation. So when it says the blossoms come up, it's really talking about the leadership has appeared, because the leadership did not appear before that. The beginning of the miracle, or part of the miracle, was not just the pyrotechnics that we see from God. The fact that leadership appeared, leadership came forward. There were no leaders for hundreds of years while the Israelites were enslaved in Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron came. Okay, go ahead.
The time of the nightingale, Hazamir, has arrived. The time for Israel to be redeemed has arrived. The time for the foreskin to be cut off, Shetizamer, has arrived. The time for Egypt to be cut off has arrived. The time for their idol worship to be uprooted has arrived, as it is stated. And I will administer punishments against all the gods of Israel.
Okay, so Zamir here, in translating it here as this translation, I just cut and paste this translation. When this translation still uses the time of the nightingale, it still works, because the Hebrew, you need to know it's Zamir. You need to have the Hebrew here. Zamir means to cut, to prune. Besides the fact that it means music, that's another conversation. And what are the things that were pruned or cut on this occasion? Not everybody remembers, but the Israelites did not circumcise their children all the years of slavery in Egypt. It's only when they left they did. By the way, and during the 40 years of wandering, they also didn't, right? And Joshua had, in order to do the Pesach in Joshua's time, they also did it. So there's something there going on, but Zamir means to cut the foreskin. What else does it mean? It means to cut off the time from Egypt. It's a timnal cutting off, and it also means a cultural cutting off of idolatry, right? So wordplay, go ahead.
The time for the sea to have its water split has arrived, as it is stated, the water split. The time for song has arrived, as is stated, then Moses sang. Rabbi Tanchuma said, the time to compose paeans to the Holy One, blessed be he, has arrived, as it is stated, the Lord is my strength and my song, v'zimrat Yah. Paeans to the Lord, zemirat Yah. Rabbi Bevai said, your statutes for paeans to me, from Psalms. The sound of the turtle dove, Hator, is heard in our land, Rabbi Yochanan said. The voice of a good explorer, Tayar, was heard in our land. This is Moses at the time that he said, Moses said, so said the Lord, at about midnight.
You could see he's almost going, it's on steroids. So as much as he's going, Zamir, not only that cuts off, but then it also means the water split. But they're different verbs, but it's all associative. So things that separated, the water separated. But then he goes to the other meaning of Zamir that rabbinic Hebrew knew, which was a song, Zimrat Yah. And this is a little ironic because it's no longer translated. This is from Ozi v'Zimrat Yah v'Hilil Yeshua, right? Ozi v'Zimrat Yah. What we know from Tehillim and also from Song of the Sea. That phrase appears in both places. Everybody thought for centuries that what it meant was my strength is a song to God, Zimrat Yah, song to God. Until the Ugaritic language was discovered in the first half of the 20th century, and there's a verb which is damar, with a letter that we no longer have in Hebrew, but leading scholars to understand that Zayin Mem Resh is not always from the word to sing, it can be from the word of fortress. So Zimrat Yah means Mitsudat Yah, or there's another, I'm thinking of another, Tsur, yeah, like Tsur, a great rock, a great fortress. So when you say Ozi v'Zimrat Yah v'Hilil Yeshua, God is my salvation is God, my fortress is God and will be my salvation, that actually makes more sense than saying God is my strength is God, my song to God, and God is my salvation. We love that song business. We love the idea, especially cantors, right? They love the idea that a Zimrat Yah it fortifies us. I'm guessing. Certainly, I love the idea, but it's not. It's actually not correct from an academic, scientific point of view. Not that matters all that much, but in the Midrash's point of view, though, it's all fair game. And then you talk about songs to God, because again, Pesach. And going back to the Seder, the relevance to the Seder, the singing the Hallel at the Seder, the songs that we do, and then perhaps I'll also we'll get to the Torah in a second, and perhaps I'll also say that what strengthens the relationship of so many Jews to the Seder? The music, the songs. It's the food, but it's also the songs and the disappointment that some people have when you don't get to all those long songs at the very end. And then finally, going on to another word there, the tor, which is the turtle dove, is very similar to a word that's not in biblical Hebrew, but in rabbinic Hebrew. No, it's in biblical Hebrew. Latur, to discover. Okay, sorry, a little bit in different directions, but this is the example of Midrash Shir Hashirim Rabbah. It's if the editor brought everything he knew about one thing, amassed it on that one verse, and then you get to choose. So it's not like it's, it doesn't matter that one interpretation contradicts another, or it doesn't mesh with the other. They're all possibilities, which in essence is poetry. Ria.
Oh, I wanted to ask in that what of all these different interpretations, and so what do you think? Do you think the rabbi has the idea of X and superimposes X on Shir HaShirim, or does she or he draw out an interpretation from the word and then put it in different contexts and try to find meaning?
So this is the quintessential question in the study of Midrash. Some of us have, we kind of been going over this, many of us been going in and out of this question for the last many years as we studied together, because I'm often bringing Midrash. So we talk in the study of Midrash, there's two categories. One is, there are different kinds of categories, but one way of breaking it down is Midrash Yotzer and Midrash Mekayem. Midrash Yotzer, it would be a creative Midrash, and Midrash Mekayem means a supportive Midrash. So an example of a creative Midrash would be, I really don't know, I don't know how to talk about I don't know how to express my love for God. I just don't know how to do it. There's a book about love poetry between a man and a woman. Let me open up Shir HaShirim and see. Maybe I can be inspired by some of these words to read it. That would be a Midrash Yotzer, a creative Midrash. A Midrash Mekayem, a supportive Midrash, would be, well, I know what my theology is. I know what I believe about God. I know about the end of time, Messiah coming, all these kind of things. Now let me open up and see where my proof text might be. What can I be used? It's almost like a legal, it's a legal kind of a thing. The same thing about the argument over the Supreme Court, right? And what are those two terms they use at the Supreme Court? Somebody remind me.
Originalism.
Originalism, and the other one is and there's another. The alternative to that. Do they create new law, or do they just, have to consider it recycled? So that's a quintessential question. I think it's a mixture of both, although I would say in my experience, Ria, probably 85% of Midrash, 90% of Midrash is supportive Midrash. People were already doing what they were doing, whether it was halacha or whether they were believing what they were feeling already. It was influenced by all sorts of factors. Then they looked for a way to support it. And I don't think that's one might say that's not as lofty as creative Midrash. But anyway, I just we're already way over. I just want to end on this last thing. We're jumping through to the Middle Ages, but I wanted to end on this particular thing. On the words, "For now the winter is past," a parable referring to the final fulfillment and the end of exile. The blossoms have appeared in the land. This refers to the nearness of the days of ease and the coming of the time of inheritance and rest. Some words of nechama, of comfort at the end. Perhaps we can read this and know that even if right now it doesn't feel like the trees are blossoming that much, it doesn't feel like there's so much harmony going on, we don't see the gazelles, perhaps this is a hint as to the nearness of things that will get better. Please save your questions for next time. I apologize for going over so long. I won't be meeting with you next week, but in 2 weeks from now, we will do one final passage of Shir HaShirim, and I'll try to pick a juicy one. Okay? Because I know Ria likes the juicy ones. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for being here.
And
Thank you.
Thank you for being our teacher, as we say at the New Cage Conference.
It was a great one, and look for an email or newsletter to let us know what's going on next week. I don't know yet, and I'm sure Rabbi Marsha will have something for us, or at least some information for us. So that'd be good. Thank you so much, Rabbi Dave.